Good afternoon, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a pretty awesome build guide for you all, and since you all seem to be liking these build guides, I wanted to take it back down to right below 800 bucks like our last build guide price, and I wanted to give you guys an even better performing PC. This one obviously is going to be very similar to the last one, but there are a few changes made to that original build that actually makes this build even a little better than the last one. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the build and we're talking about the parts. All right, so kicking off this build, we have the Ryzen 5 5600. This is the non-X variant, so it's just a little slower than the 5600X, which we used in the last video. The difference between this one and the last one is that I picked this one up on eBay for 93 bucks with no stock cooler. So we got the cost of the CPU down just a little bit more, which is very nice, and that allowed us to get even cheaper with a better GPU at the end of the videos. Oh, and really quickly, before we dive into everything else in terms of the parts list, the main thing that I would change with this build is if you wanted to future-proof your build just a little more and spend a little extra money, you can go with the Ryzen 5 7500F, which is on AliExpress, and that's around 125 to 130 bucks on average. If you really wanted to get a little better CPU performance and have a more future-proof system, I would definitely spend the extra 60 bucks, but let's just say you're stuck at 750 and this is the best you're gonna get, so I still think this is a really good option. And this is the ASRock B550M Pro 4, and overall it of course just comes with better heat sinks across the board. It has an M.2 slot cover, so it's just overall a nicer board. It does have an 8-pin for power, so nothing crazy. I wouldn't go anything past like a Ryzen 7 5800X3D or anything like that. It's probably the max I'd go for this build, but even then, it's a nice and clean board. It's got 4 RAM slots, and we paid at the time of filming this video $99. I think it was $89 plus shipping or something like that, but still not a bad pickup for the board. If you wanted to save a little extra bit of money, you could go with the ASRock Pro B550M SE, I believe, or the Pro SE from ASRock, and that is all white and it's a little cheaper. And now for the RAM, we have 32 gigs of Team Group T-Force Vulcan Z DDR4 at 3600 megahertz. This is a CL18 cast latency. Some really good speeds for DDR4 RAM, and the nice thing about going on M4 is how cheap DDR4 is now. I only picked this kit up for 54 bucks, so pretty solid kit. I like to go just basic non-RGB RAM, and the main reason why I do this is because you're always gonna have to install motherboard software to control the RGB on the RAM, and sometimes I don't want to do that because motherboard software can be a pain. So keeping software to a minimum on your build is just kind of a nice thing to do, and I think it's worth trading out colored RAM for a little easier experience when controlling your RGB. All right, next up for storage, we have the Clevcraft C910 M.2 SSD, and this is a Gen 4 NVMe SSD with some really good read and write speeds for the price. Only paid $54.99, and the read speeds are 5,000 megabytes per second, and the write speeds are at 4,800 megabytes per second. So honestly, some really good value with this RAM right here. I personally think for all my builds, I don't see why anyone would go anything less than 1 terabyte of storage, unless that you have just a few games that you like to play, you don't like to download too much stuff. That's the only reason why I'd see less storage making sense to you, but I feel like, especially when you're flipping PCs like me, there's a high chance that the person that's buying this is not going to want to go through the trouble of upgrading storage down the road. So 1 terabyte I think is kind of the bare minimum for that, because you can fill up 512 gigs so fast nowadays with how much games take up in storage nowadays. So that's kind of my reasoning behind it, and if you wanted to save some extra money, you can go down to 512, but personally speaking, I just don't think it's worth the savings of like 20 bucks. The stock CPU did not come with a CPU cooler, and normally you can just use the stock AMD cooler for the 5600 and you'd be just fine, but honestly I think it's also worth it to pick up a tower cooler to keep that CPU nice and chilly. And this is the VTrue V5 ARGB in black, just a standard black tower cooler that's pretty basic, but I think we only paid around like 20 bucks for it at the time of purchasing this. And these tower coolers have a TDP recommendation up to 200 watts, and that's gonna be plenty above the threshold for a 5600. So we know it's gonna be nice and chilly. And for the case, we have the DIY PC Q3 V2 in black, and it's funny because the last $800 build guide I did, we used the white one, and that's the last time I actually built in this case. So ironically, this build actually had it. I don't think I really even planned for that, but that's what this build has, and I think this is just the overall cheapest fish tank case you can buy. And I think the biggest thing that I like about it is that it fits 3 fan cards, and you can fit, you know, a lot of stuff in here. If you really wanted to, you could even upgrade down the road to a 360 millimeter radiator, which a lot of cases don't have nowadays. Like the Sama Q5, it's nice, but you can barely fit a 240 mil radiator in there. It's a very tight fit, and this one has no problem doing it. It's easy for cable management, so you can also add sleeve cables, and it comes with 3 pre-installed ARGB fans. So it's my go-to case when it comes to like a very, very budget build. I think Fish Tank sells right now too, so that's how we went with it. You guys already know we got to flip the fans around so we can get the maximum amount of airflow, because pretty much all budget case manufacturers, for some reason, don't know how to set up fans. I'm assuming they prioritize aesthetics over the actual function of them. But you know, I think especially for having a GPU like ours in this video, I think it's worth it to flip these fans around to have some intake fans and increase the airflow inside of the case. And just like that, the fans are flipped. So we have intakes going to the inside of the case now, which we love to see. And then we're gonna go ahead and prep this build for the motherboard install and the power supply. And for the power supply, we have the Segotep GM 750 watt 80 plus gold. Solid power supply that we've used so many times at PC Bros, and it's doing bulk order, so of course I'm just gonna choose it because we have it in stock here. And you can find them for around 75 bucks on Amazon, so it's a pretty good price for a 750 watt 80 plus gold fully modular power supply. As far as packaging goes, it's super nice. They give you a little pamphlet. They have everything in a nice little sleeve cover. And then all your modular cables are in here. You could go with a 650 watt for this build, but I wanted to get the extra headroom because our GPU is pretty power hungry sometimes. So I thought, you know, extra couple bucks and more headroom, and the fact that it's fully modular, so there's less cables for you to deal with, I think it's definitely worth the extra couple bucks if you wanted to do that. But if you wanted to really maximize price to performance, you could drop down to a 650 watt, especially if you wanted to do what I said earlier in the video and go up to like AM5. And in addition to our actual regular cables that we have for our fully modular power supply, I went ahead and picked up some Asia Horse black sleeve cables, and these are just kind of like a staple for me, honestly. I really love how these things look, and again, you can definitely increase price to performance by not using this step, but it's like 25 bucks to add some extra nice sleeve cables into your build, and it'll just give that extra little bit of satisfaction whenever you finish a PC build. And I think it brings the aesthetics up to like the next level. And additionally, these power supplies are also ATX 3.0, so you have the 12 volt high power connector, which is this connector right here, and this will allow you to upgrade to maybe like a 4070 Super down the road if you want to do like a CPU and GPU upgrade down the road. And don't forget guys, a lot of these budget cases are gonna have some weird standoff locations, so make sure you move these standoffs to the correct place so you don't end up shorting out your motherboard. And for safe measure, what I always love to do as well is add on the 2 standoffs at the end here that they never usually want to include. And another thing I like to do in all my builds is make sure, especially if you have an air cooler, the back fan on the exhaust here lines up as much as possible, because I've noticed that a lot of these exhaust fans will be kind of mounted at the very top and they're not in line with the tower cooler. I know it's very minute and small, but it's just something that I noticed a lot and it kind of bothers me. So also while we're doing this, I'm also gonna rotate the fan to the right so we don't see the cables coming up the top here. Very small, subtle changes, but that's what makes the PC build overall just a little more clean. And aside from the GPU, the last piece of the puzzle when it comes to motherboard setup and all the fans is gonna be this hub right here. This is an ARGB hub that has a couple of ARGB plugins. This right here is where you can plug in a reset switch, which is what we're gonna be doing for this build, so we can actually control the RGB using the reset switch. And honestly, you can find any RGB hub on Amazon as long as it has a remote for you to use, or you can use this in a sense to where you can control it up with a reset switch. Again, it's like 10 bucks, it's optional. You could just plug everything into the motherboard because there are ARGB headers for the motherboard, and that would also work. And the last piece of the puzzle is the GPU, and this is the RTX 3070. This is gonna be a better performer than the 4060 from my first build guide that I ever did on the channel. So I paid $265 for this Asus TUF model, and I really liked the style and size of this GPU whenever I saw it online. And I think that's the main reason why I picked the DIY PC case again, was because of the fact that it can fit a large GPU like this, and it can look good while doing so as well. One thing I did notice on this GPU is that you can kind of see this thing is kind of dirty. It's got some like adhesive stuck on it. So I'm gonna try and get some of this off. Not in the most perfect condition, but hey, I mean, as long as it performs well and it's not running too hot or anything like that, I think it's gonna be a good pickup. And $265 is still a pretty good deal for 3070 nowadays. And honestly, for a $750 build, I don't think you can complain. Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed that little montage there, but we're gonna go straight into the benchmarks for this PC here, and shout out to Zach from PC Bros. He has a full video on the full benchmarking run for this PC that he did today on his YouTube channel at PC Bros LLC on YouTube, so check that out. I'll have a link in the description down below. But starting straight into Warzone basic 1080p, we're averaging around 120 to 130 FPS, and you can really see on that game as well that you're only utilizing like 75% of the GPU, so realistically you could bump up the settings even more, or maybe even set it to 1440p and get a pretty good high refresh rate experience even on Warzone. And you could also use upscaling like FSR for some reason. Warzone loves FSR even if you're on an NVIDIA GPU, so that could definitely push you over the 240 FPS frame rate that you were looking for. In Fortnite on medium settings in 1080p, after dropping we averaged around 200 FPS give or take. Sometimes we were seeing more over like 210 and sometimes under depending on where you're at in the map, but pretty solid again. And again, you're also not fully utilizing that GPU again, so I really think you could definitely bump up the graphic settings on a lot of these games and still have a really good high refresh rate experience. And next for Cyberpunk, we tested this at 1080p on medium settings first, and we got an average of 115 FPS, a low of 87, and a high of 135 FPS. We also retested Cyberpunk 2077 on high settings in 1080p just to see how high of an FPS you could get with a more higher preset of settings. We got 112 FPS average with a low of 79 FPS and a high of 129. So realistically, you can bump up settings pretty high on this GPU setup, and you can still get some really good refresh rates as you can see on that test there. And lastly, in Black Myth Wukong with the built-in benchmark, we averaged 96 FPS with a high of 111 and a low of 14. So I think that minimum is definitely the beginning stutters of the game whenever you first load in. It is a very demanding game, and it's probably the most demanding game on the market right now, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at that. The low average was around 85, so that kind of gives you an idea as to the lowest you'll be at in this game. Overall, pretty strong benchmarking run for the 3070 in more demanding games like Black Myth Wukong. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this build overall, and to wrap up this video, I think the only thing that I would have changed if you are willing to spend just a little more money is going with a 7500F. Overall, it's going to be a little better performer. AM5, DDR5, there's a couple extra benefits to going with that route, but if you're still wanting to stick at the $750 price point, this is a really good option for you, and it turned out just how I wanted it to. And let me know if you want to see any more price point build guides. I know some people have been asking me to do AMD GPU videos for builds, and obviously I'm kind of partial towards NVIDIA since that's what I like to use on my own PCs, but hey, if you want to see an AMD GPU video and a build that I plan with that for a good price point, let me know down in the comments below. But thanks again for watching to the end if you all did, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.